video, we are going to expand on our ability to graph out function rules by also now being tasked with the challenge of having to come up with the function rule. So in a previous video, I gave you the function rule and said, here, create a table and graph to represent the situation. Now we need to write the rule, create a table and graph. And then we're going to use it to predict a value that happens somewhere on this graph. So let's do this, shall we? So you travel on a long train ride at a speed of 80 miles per hour. So what we're tasked with doing now is creating a function rule that represents that situation. So this is a little bit less instruction than I've given you in previous videos. So let's come up with the function rule first. Now, if we think about it, if we are traveling at a speed of 80 miles for each hour, let's just define some variables here. I've already given you a little bit of a hint. We have the distance we're going to travel, and that's in miles, and the time we will travel for. So those are our variables. So I'll kind of write this up here. Let's let d equal the distance, and then let's let h equal the number of hours. So now we need to relate those. Well, if we travel 80 miles per hour, another way of saying that is 80 miles for each hour. Or after 1 hour, we go 80 miles. 2 hours, 160 miles, adding another 80. You're repeatedly adding 80 for each hour you go up, which would be multiplication. So the distance that we go is going to be equal to 80 miles for each hour. A straight up algebraic translation. Very sweet. So we've now written a function rule. And we know that it is a function because for any h value we plug in, any number, we would expect to get out only one d value. There you have it. Now we're going to create a table and then graph from that table creation. Let's do it. So to create a table, very simply, we're going to need an input column, right? So that's going to be the h values that we plug in. Then we're going to need from there a little bit of work. So I'll show that as d equals 80h. Hopefully you can read that 80. And then another column. Once we have that, that'll be our d value, right? This will be our work. Then we're going to couple these two values together as points. What do I mean by that? Well, this is going to be the point h, comma, d. And we know that because time in hours, right, which we're going to do h, that is going to be the horizontal value. And then we've got d is going to be our vertical value. It's like having our y value on a graph. Very, very cool. All right, let's do it. So now, how many hours should we put in? That's up to you. I would probably go by ones. I think that's the easiest way to go. So we'll go 0, 1 hours, 2 hours, 3 hours, 4, and then we can go to 5, and then maybe stop at 6. So I'm going to go ahead and determine the intervals for this. So if I'm going up by 1 each time, then I think that we'll get between 6 and 10 intervals if I just go up by ones. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I went up by ones there, but only put every other number down so as not to crowd that horizontal axis. Now I just need to plug in values for h, right? That's what we need to do. So I've got that the distance is equal to 80 times 0, which would be 0. So what is the point that we get out? We get the point 0, 0. After no hours traveled, we plug in 0 into our function rule. We get out 0 distance. Then I'll do 80 times 1. After 1 hour traveled, that's going to be 80 miles. What point is that? The point 180. Very sweet. Then we'll plug in 2 hours, and so on and so forth. So 80 times 2 is 160. And that's going to be the point 2, 160. Now the reason why I'm doing the table first is we need to determine what our vertical intervals are going to be. And it looks like they're going to be pretty big numbers. We'll do 80 times 3. And that's going to be equal to 240. So that's the point, 3 hours, 240 miles. We'll fit in 4 here. 80 times 4. That's going to be 320. So that's the point 4, 320. Almost there, peeps. Hang in, hang in. Doing great. Then we plug in the point 5. 80 times 5 is equal to 400. And so that's going to be the point 5 hours, and that will give us out 400 miles. And finally, we'll plug in 6. So we'll do 80 times 6, which is going to be 480. Notice that we've gone up by 80 each time, which makes sense because we're traveling at 80 miles for each hour. So after 6 hours, hopefully it's a fun train ride, you've traveled 480 miles. From here, all we now need to do is plot these points. But wait a minute. We need to know what our intervals are here. We go from 0 to 480, and remember the rule that we don't want to have more than 10 intervals or so. So this is roughly 500. So let's say that I did 500 divided evenly over 10 intervals. That would give me blocks of a size of 50. So I just estimated that to be 500. Well, that should work for us then. So if I go up by 50, so this will be 50, 100, 150, 200, 250, 300, 350, 400 or 400, 450, 500. And that right there, folks, is a beautiful interval that will include all the values we need. Now, we're going to approximate where our values are when we graph this because we're not going up by 80s each time. So now I just plot the points. 0, 0 goes right here. And if you need help remembering how to plot points, we've got earlier videos on that, peeps. 1, 80. So that'll be over 1, up 80 is roughly here, roughly. And then 2, 160. So 2, 160 is a little bit higher than 150. So that's like roughly here-ish. And then we have 3, 240. So 3, this is 250, so just a little bit shy of that is 240. And then 4, 320. It must be so much fun to watch me graph, let me tell you. Hang in there, we're doing it. 5, 400, so that's over 5, up 400. That's a nice exact point. And then last but not least, 6, 480. So we go over 6, up 480. That's roughly there. So it won't be a perfect line because we graph this out by hand, but we do want to connect the dots. And the reason why we want to connect the dots is we know that there are times in between 0 and 1 hour. You could be traveling for 45 minutes. And that would be roughly here with the amount of distance that we've traveled. Very cool stuff. So now we go to the second question. It says, how far will the train travel in 5.5 hours? Two ways of doing that. You could do, and this is the exact way, the distance is equal to 80 times 5.5 hours. Use your function rule. Plug in the input of 5.5. That will equal out to, let's see, 440 miles. Or you could look at the graph and you could say, well, 5.5 hours is roughly here. Trace up with your eyes all the way up to here. And hey, look what point we get. About 440. That'll give you an approximate. This plugging into the function will give you an exact. There you have it, peeps. A little bit of an extension of what we've been doing in that you had to first come up with your own function rule and then rock and roll with creating a table and using that to create a great graph. I love doing it. I hope you're rocking it now.